Podcasting from the DC metro area, you are listening to the Association Chat podcast. I'm the host and producer of Association Chat, Kiki L'Italienne, and every week I try to bring you the best and the brightest minds to talk about topics that will help you improve some facet of what you're trying to do with your next project, job, career, or life. It's all about getting stronger here on the chat. Oh, and a quick disclaimer. The content of this podcast, website, and any other area connected to Association Chat is my opinion alone, and please take it as such. While I try to bring on experts and thought leaders to help guide you, none of the information here should replace legal or any other advice that you might need. Please use common sense and personal responsibility when acting on any information gathered here. So with that, I hope you'll sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Association Chat. Welcome to Association Chat, your weekly online discussion for the association community where we warm ourselves by the virtual fire with topics of the day, welcoming thought leaders and trailblazers alike to join up in this online home for the community. I'm the host of Association Chat, Kiki L'Italienne, and I want to give a shout out to our wonderful sponsor, Fontiva. Yes, the AMS for Innovation for their ongoing support of Association Chat and the community here. If you're on Crowdcast, you can click the little call to action button to check out their blog for the association community. Or if you're listening to this later on iTunes, you can just visit fontiva.com. And for today's show, my friends, we are talking with Thom Singer about what he has called the paradox of potential. Now, Thom, you need to know this. Thom is a professional keynote speaker. He's a master of ceremonies. He also does small meeting facilitation. He's married to a meeting planner, and he's the author of 12 books on the power of business development, networking, entrepreneurship, legal marketing, and presentation skills. Oh my gosh. Did I also fail to mention that he is the host of Cool Things Entrepreneurs Do podcast? He regularly speaks at business and association conferences around the United States. And here he is today with us. Welcome to the show, Thom.
Well, you read that bio. This is the most exciting part of the bio is I'm here on Association Chat with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'm so excited that you're here. So, okay. So the paradox of potential, it's a compelling title, but I wanted to find out a little bit more about, what prompted it, because the paradox of potential, you're digging into what happens with the way people set their goals, the potential that they have, and how they meet it or fail to meet it, and what happens in between. But before we jump into that, I want to find out what compelled you to look into this. Like what started you on this journey?
So last year in 2016, I actually was working on a project. I was trying to write a one-man show. And I invested not a lot of time, but some serious time in trying to put together a somewhat entertaining, but also sort of educational show, sort of a business-oriented one-man show. It was something I thought, like some of these conferences I work at will have like 5 or 6 keynote speakers. And I thought, gosh, what if you could do something different? So I came up with this concept, and it never really reached its full potential, if you will. But the main character of the one-man show was my own childhood imaginary friend. Now, I don't know if you had an imaginary friend, but I actually had one. Like there's a commercial right now running, I think, for Jif peanut butter, where the mom like takes a bite out of the sandwich and puts it there. My aunt used to make an extra sandwich for Chucky, my imaginary friend, and leave dog biscuits for his dogs, and then take a bite. I think I was the one. I would take a bite and then put it down and go, look, Chucky ate part of his sandwich. So the theory of the one-man show was Chucky 50 years later, and how he was disappointed in me that I hadn't always lived up to my potential. I was a really creative kid. I wanted to be an actor. And then I sort of fell into being very corporate and sort of put my ladder against that corporate wall. And now in the end, working as a speaker, I get to sort of have a lot of that stuff I wanted about being an actor or a performer. But I was in my mid-40s before I started doing that. So a lot of the play was about how maybe I waited a long time to realize some of my potential. And it led me to doing a bunch of research. So I started reading all these studies out of Harvard and Carnegie Mellon and all these other schools about potential. And then things like that Gallup had done about people in the workforce and how companies sort of identify who their high potential employees are. And if you've worked for a big company, they often have hypo programs, but they've gone back and studied now 30 years later of these programs. And oftentimes the people who were chosen to be the high potential employees and given special training are not the leaders of the company. And so I sort of started off doing a little bit of research about just potential in general. And I started finding all this business information about why people miss the mark when either they themselves think they have a lot of potential or their boss thinks they have a lot of potential. So I started an online survey, and I've interviewed over 250 people, and it's not a big scientific survey. I've had a couple PhDs come and tell me how I need to change it, so I'm working on tweaking it a little bit. But what's really interesting is how many people are telling me across industry lines, across job titles, that they have more potential in their career and that they feel like they could be accomplishing more. And I could relate to that because I've always felt that. So I started looking at it in my own speaking business, the potential that I had when I set off, where I thought I would be 8 years later, and the reality, and I'm doing really well, but there was still a gap between what I thought the potential was and the actual results. So I started interviewing some people one-on-one about, how do you feel about this and why? Why do you think you've been held back? And so that's how it all got started. And I sort of stumbled into it. The one-man show got shelved. I did a read-through for a bunch of my friends. About 30 people came to a theater and watched me. I didn't act it out, but I read kind of script in hand. And they all came back and said that the concept was really good, but I had to do some work. One of the things that all 30 people said is my childhood imaginary friend's name was Chucky. And if you're over 40, that is a murderous doll.
Yes.
Even though my Chucky preceded the murdering doll Chucky of the 70s or 80s horror films, I was going to have to change his name. And so I think he's becoming Lucky. But
Lucky Chucky.
Lucky, not Chucky. But it's sort of this ongoing thing. They had a bunch of suggestions, so I percolated on it for a while. But this research that I started spawned this whole other keynote, and I've actually done it in keynote form, in workshop form, and then at board retreats, I'll do like a 45 or an hour presentation on this gap between potential and results, and then we'll say, what about your association for next year? And we'll whiteboard what the potential is for the following year, and then where they think the gap is going to be. So it's actually become sort of a couple of different things. I wouldn't say by accident, because I was pretty intentional about it, but it came about. I wasn't looking for the topic, and the topic sort of found me, and it's related really well to my clients.
That's so interesting. I love that story because I feel like some of the best talks I've heard, some of the best sort of programs that are out there, it's not like you set out to do exactly that thing, but it's almost like it was given to you, like you stumble across it and it captured you. And so I love that idea. And so why don't you tell me a little bit more? So you this idea captured you, you created this talk. Okay. So in producing the keynote and then this sort of program and workshop that you do, is it a workshop? Do you do a workshop with it? Sounds like it kind of.
Yeah, it's sort of, like the board retreat facilitation or a workshop. I've done it both as a breakout and in that board situation and as a keynote. So it changes because the purpose of each of those is very different, how interactive they get, et cetera. But yeah, it can fall into all of them. And even the keynote is very interactive because I'll ask the audience, why do they think the gap exists? And I'll let them feed out why. And then we'll take whatever they said, because I've come up with about 10 different reasons that these 250 people who've taken the quiz have told me sort of why they're being held back or what's keeping them from reaching their potential. And yet they fall into 3 buckets. I mean, there's 10 different ones, and there's actually 30 different ones. It's just the way people phrase things. I've narrowed it down to 10, but they fall into 3 buckets. And the buckets are the plan. So people don't really know what they're doing in their job. They don't have goals. And I actually, when I became a speaker, long before I was a professional speaker, but when I started just speaking on business 15 years ago, I started speaking about goal setting. I mean, that was my original topic. So I found it fascinating that the first bucket really comes down to people don't feel that they have a real clear roadmap or a real clear plan. And there's a couple things that fall into there. And then the second thing that falls into is sort of what Simon Sinek would call your why. So it's sort of purpose. People go to work. They plan their events, they go through the motions, but they don't really feel they know why they're doing it. And so a lot of it falls to that purpose. So it's plans and purpose. And then the third bucket pleasantly surprised me because it's all about people. And if anybody knows me, I've been speaking about your network and your brand and how you get people more engaged in their community or more engaged at the conferences that we put on for a decade. I mean, I built my whole career around being the conference catalyst and getting people to embrace in a world where everybody wants to be on their phone, getting people to embrace people. And what people are telling me, they're being held back because of their boss. Their boss is holding them back. Their spouse or their loved ones are telling them they're not worthy. They don't have the right team to support them, or they've never had a mentor. So there's all these things that fall into that people box. And that sort of excited me that it was plan, purpose, and people. So that's sort of where the research took me. And then there's 10 steps that people have given me on how you can actually focus and bridge that gap. Although I have my own theory, and that is that you can't build a bridge across the gap. The gap between potential and results exists for a lot of people, not for everybody. Some people feel they're kicking ass and they're doing. Can I say that? They're kicking toe. They're kicking ass. And some people feel that way, and they don't see that there's a gap. But most people see that gap. But what I tell people is if you build a bridge across, as you cross that bridge, you're going to end up with more potential because you're going to meet new people. You're going to learn new things. So your potential is going to shift. So if you focus on building the bridge first and then going, I don't think you're just going to fall into oblivion. So what I tell people is to build a lattice or a scaffolding and know that it's never done, and you just keep adding pieces to it.
So what I wanted to ask you is, have you applied some of these things that you've discovered? I mean, one of the things that I found in some of the work that I do is that as you're doing this research, you end up being able to apply some of the things that you learn, or you look back and you realize, oh, that does work because I applied that. I've done that in the past and I know it works. So do you have any examples of that yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to talk numbers, or I don't want to be like braggadocious. Like, look at me, aren't I cool? But my business.
You can totally do that. You can totally do that on this show, especially right now.
Okay. But my business is up by maybe 50% over 2016. And 2016 was the best year I'd had. Now it was somewhat flat over 15, but it was up by like $1 or something. But it's way up this year. And a lot of other speakers have been like, why? Why are you, not quite doubling, but upwards of that? Why are you working so much more and working with much, more amazing clients just in the size and scope of the events that I've been the master of ceremonies at, or the keynote speaker at, or groups that have brought me in to facilitate. It's the year I've always wanted since I started the business 8 years ago. And somebody asked me why. And I said, part of it, I think, in our business of being a speaker and being a vendor in the meetings industry, I think a lot of it is longevity. So part of it has to go with the fact that you've actually been out there working for 8 years, people feel safe hiring you. I think that's part of it. But the other part is that I've followed many of these steps. I mean, I can just kind of go over the 10 steps that have sort of come out of this, and it's not rocket science. I mean, this is just what people are telling me.
You've got to give us the 10 steps. You realize that, of course. Okay.
Well, and I'll give them to you. I have to read them, but but I wrote them down because I figured I've listened to your show. I knew you were going to ask me.
I need to know the good stuff.
I knew you were going to want the tips. This is not a fluffy show. I'm quite aware.
No, it's not. I know.
But I've put a lot of these into practice because I'm researching them and I'm talking to people about them. And then you can't help but thinking, oh, my own I'm kind of that stupid. I don't do that. So, and a lot of people will tell me, well, Thom, these are pretty basic. What I ask people is, are you doing them? So the first one is you just got to take ownership of your own life. You can't sit there and say, oh, it's me. I'm not famous, or I don't have a New York Times bestseller, or, all the reasons that a lot of people, get business in my world. Take ownership of it. Just decide, okay, this is who I am. I'm not famous, but I work and I do a good job. I have to take ownership for where I screw up, or, if a client, loves me or doesn't love me. I have to own that. I can't point my finger at a sound person or anything else. And so I think I've always done that, but that's the first one that comes up. The second one is set really clear goals, which, like I said, I think I've always done. But here's where it gets interesting for me. The third one is you have to work past the fear. And this is a scary business. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, it's scary to be on your show because you know there's going to be people watching you and judging you, and there'll be people like, I don't like him, or whatever.
Oh, stop.
You got to put
they
yourself.
All love you.
Number 3 is you got to work past the fear. And I was kind of joking that it's scary to do anything, but you have to, fear can paralyze us. And there's a lot of people who I've talked to who don't take basic actions on a daily basis because they're scared of what's going to happen. And what fascinates me is a lot of people are scared of what's going to happen if they succeed.